Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Midwest Whitetails After Hour podcast, brought to you by Hoyt Archery. Tonight, I am joined by Jared, Grant, Mike, and Owen. My name is Jason Seitz. I'll be your host for the evening. It is Friday, November the 12th, and the rut's over. Or is it?
Is that the report from Wisconsin or what?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. We smashed the greenheads today because it would have been way too horrible sitting in a tree. So
I think Jared could probably attest to that.
Yeah. Hey man, I feel like I've been skiing or something. I'm so windburnt right now.
I was actually happy to be at work today. I kept looking out the window. I was like, that's not good. This is a work day. Oh man.
So Jared, you went out tonight?
I did pretty much the entire day. We got down for a little break at lunch, but then we got right back in the stand. It was cold. I think the real field was in like the mid to upper teens here with the wind chill. Just a real cold west wind. And it was like at the beginning, it was just enough rain just to get all your clothes wet for the walk-in to make the long day a little more miserable with the wind.
Ouch.
But the deer
that's
moved.
a duck hunting kind of day.
Yeah. The deer moved decent. Saw decent rutting activity. Bucks chasing does. Mature bucks cruising. Just kind of the story of my season. No shooters, but had decent movement pretty much the entire day despite the high winds.
You did. Okay. I have no idea what took place other than what the cuttings are telling me, and I was just looking at, normally I'll get 10 pictures at a time. I think is what I've got it set to, and I would get I think I got 2 most of the time all day, so there wasn't a whole lot going on.
Yeah.
I
I
think
said I started back in the timber, just hoping they'd kind of be back in there, protected from the wind, and it wasn't terribly windy back there. Once we got in the timber, it was a lot better. We had a hot doe, or I think was a hot doe, come right underneath our tree to start the morning right at daybreak, and I was like, "That's this is perfect." And the only 3 bucks that ever caught her trail throughout the morning hunt were 3 1.5-year-olds, but they would hit it and nose to the ground and run right by our tree every time. And it wasn't until about probably 10:50, pushing 11 o'clock, we had a 4-year-old come run around with a doe, and then we also around 11 o'clock had a 5-year-old come cruise by the tree right at 11. So later morning movement was better. It was pretty slow from probably, I don't know, 8:30 to 10:30 this morning. And then afternoon was pretty slow until the last hour. And start moving, start seeing some chasing and stuff like that. So it was a decent day, and the afternoon hunt was tough because we moved out to the wide open, just had the wind in our face the entire afternoon, overlooking just a bunch of wetland ground, some standing beans, some sorghum, hoping that with that big temperature drop, the deer would start hitting the food. And it didn't. There were a few deer feeding, but most of them were kind of getting pushed around, so they didn't stay in the food for very long.
Did anybody hunt last night? Just to back up for just a second, in Wisconsin here we had tremendous winds, like 170 miles an hour. It
Cat
was
5.
yeah, right. Like I had my camera on the arm. Jared, you and I talked earlier in the day about doing an interview, and I'm trying to do this interview, and all of a sudden the camera just swing. I'm like, all right, we'll just stop that.
Yeah.
I never saw a deer last night until it was getting pretty dark. So
We did not get out last night.
I didn't hunt last night either.
Max and I attempted to go tonight. weren't very successful. We had a pretty eventful night. We were planning on going to the farm where I had the encounter with that shooter in early October, and we hunted it last week, and we had a really good encounter. We had a shooter about 200 yards out with a group of does, and perfect broad daylight. And then about 5 minutes after shooting light, my feet just hit the ground, and we had a deer come up to the decoy. And you could just barely see his outline of his frame. We knew it was him. It come up right up to the decoy about 25 yards away and just sit there for like 10 minutes. But what we learned on that hunt is these deer are coming out from this block of timber and feeding into the bean field that we're in right now. And they're using this little field road pretty much to get into that field. So our plan was tonight, we're going to get in the ghillie suits and sit in this little buffer strip that jets out into this bean field. And that road is probably like 20 yards away. So it'd be a perfect shot. And like the last mile of the drive to that farm, you got to drive on a level B road. And as you can tell with the sleet and snow, it was pretty sloppy. So right when we got up to that road, we were like, should we try it? And we sat there for a few minutes. And we're like, whatever, we're just going to send it in there. And we started in there, and instantly, we were just whiplashing everywhere. We were in the ditch. It took us like 15, 20 minutes just to get out of that road. And we were just sliding everywhere. His truck was just covered in mud. And we finally got back out to the road, and there was so much mud in his wheel wells that the truck wouldn't even drive. It was just bouncing the whole time. It was like you're in some massage chair. So, you literally couldn't go over 40 miles an hour. We went 40 miles an hour all the way home. It took us like 45 minutes to an hour to get home. So that allowed us not to hunt tonight.
So is that why he's not here? He's cleaning his truck?
Yeah, seriously. You guys are good at getting permission. You should have stopped at a farmhouse and borrowed a hose and rinsed some tires.
I know, seriously. So
you got disheartened, didn't want to walk in after that. Oh man, that's miserable.
Yeah. So
Mike, how about we go back 2 days, and why don't you take over?
there we go.
Yeah,
Let's hear about
2
that.
days. The saga has concluded for Chubbs. On my last day of vacation, on the last podcast we were talking, Jason was asking me, are you going back to work tomorrow? So I got one more day, and that was November 10th. And I stared at the map. I've been thinking about getting in this one spot. It's real thick, and it's kind of out closer to the farmer's house. And I don't really want to hunt where I watch them drive around and look at the house. But you guys have heard me say over the last couple of weeks that I kept getting daylight pictures right at first light in a clover plot where we park. And I really had that clover there just because, it was grass, and it's a good spot to shoot turkeys in the spring. And there's not many deer that use that plot. And I have a camera there primarily for trespassing purposes, but there's a scrape on the edge of that plot. He was there pretty consistently. And so at Ryan and I, the previous couple of days, were hunting up on the ridge where I thought he was cutting over into that bowl, and we never saw him. But yet I got pictures of him on the bottom plot by the skybox, and I had pictures out in the clover. I said, he's got to be cutting through this thick stuff. And so we went back and forth about getting back in the bowl. On my last morning, it was reasonable conditions. It was an east wind, or just trying to set up where I could see that clover. I could see the bean field where Bella killed, which I had a couple early morning pictures of them there. And then I'd hopefully catch them coming back in. And so we tromped in there in the dark and did a hanging hunt in a shagbark hickory, no less, again. And I think I was standing at the base of that tree looking up, and I kept going around it. I told her, I said, man, this thing leans all four ways. I couldn't find a way to put my sticks. And that tree was a corkscrew. And we're standing down there. The brush is 10 feet tall all around. I'm at the base of the tree. I said, this is so stupid, just thinking this isn't going to work. So we're going to get up there. I'm not going to be able to shoot anywhere. And anyway, I said, we're committed. So we got up there, and we got it real early. So I was set up and quiet probably 45 minutes before legal shooting. And I got a doe come under me. I can't even hardly see her through my binos. She's at 10 yards, but I assume it was a doe by the way she was kind of acting. And she walked at 10 yards. And then right as the sun was coming up, had a 1.5-year-old coming on our trail. And then I look out to the clover plot and I see a doe run across. And I'm like, there's got to be a buck, obviously. So I'm glassing. I don't see anything. Next thing I know, she comes flying back across the clover. And I look up in the cut beans and I can see what is a mature buck. I was like, it's got to be him. And I can't see his rack through the brush. And I thought I caught a glimpse of some split brows. And it's like, it's got to be him. And the way they were just heading around just in the open around the point of timber we're on. And so they go over, they're on the farm road. They go over the culvert. They're just walking out in the open, don't want to get in the brush, and come around. And the next thing you know, I see him back on the mowed path and they're going in. And at that point, I can confirm it's him. And they're probably 150 yards away, 200 yards away. The doe just is walking up the field edge where Bella killed her buck in those standing beans. And he follows her actually through the plot screen. And I tried a couple of grunts. I didn't want to get real aggressive, threw a doe bleed. And I looked back at Ryan. I said, I hope that doe is not in heat, because if she's in heat, it's over, and we're sitting there just talking about, like, man, where are they going to go? Where are we going to set up this afternoon? Next thing I know, I see him. He had turned around. He's coming back. And I have a little open gate. There used to be cattle in here. And there's just an old gate that's all grown up in the brush, but it's open. And they tend to just walk through that. And he cut through that and got in the timber with us, came down in the creek. And I mean, it just became very chaotic. It's super thick. Rye can't see him. I'm like, he's right there. He's right there. And all you would see is like glimpses of his rack. And when I realized he wasn't going to come up on the trail that we were set up on, he was going to come around, I was like, I'm not going to have a shot at him. And so he gets up, and the second he gets out of the creek and he gets straight upwind of us, as I threw a snort wheeze out, he stopped for a second and he kept going. He was grunting. So then I doe bleeded and he kind of turned, but he was walking up the edge of the thick stuff. There's kind of some old, there's an area with no trees. It's just grass that had been mowed in the past. It's kind of multiflora rows now. And so he's 40 yards away and all I can see is his head. And I just threw some grunts back behind me. He was walking and grunting. And so I just let out a few little tending grunts and he just turned and he started to try to come through the brush, but he couldn't. And there was one trail where he cut. So now he's made a full circle all the way around me. And I've got one more opening left. And he hit that opening and he started to trot. And I just, whatever I could do to get him to stop. And he stopped and I'm 37 yards. And I mean, I put it, he was quartering away. It just went right up in there and actually right in the heart. When we got at him, it cut his heart basically in half. And he trotted up 30 yards and he stopped and it was like 10 seconds and he fell over. And it just like, it's over.
Dang.
Awesome.
I mean, it was intense being in a tree that you can't hardly shoot out of and having that deer moving like that. And man, I mean, it just was all just chaos. Like I said, just reacting to what he was doing, and it just worked out perfectly. I mean, it could have just easily slipped through that gap and we wouldn't have got a shot at him. But encounter number 4, fast and furious, and pretty awesome to have him down on my last day of vacation.
That's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
It's awesome.
Congrats.
That's not an easy shot either. It's easy to take that for granted, trying to get him stopped in that 37. That's not a given by any means.
No, yeah, and I shoot that single pin. I shoot a single vertical pin. And
Oof.
so, and I have it at 30 basically, and I can shoot 35 and in pretty comfortable, and I just, if they're out in the rut, I never want to move that pin. So I practice with that pin at 35 and in. And then if I got something farther out, then I'll switch it. But I like that vertical pin, being able to see the whole deer. But yeah, when he got out there, I was like, he's getting a little far. So I was held it a little bit high, a little bit higher than I normally would. And, I mean, you couldn't have shot him more perfect. It was just right below half mast, quartering away. And it just got up in there. And I mean, he expired really quickly. And it's nice when you're taking that shot and not, it maybe looks a little low and you're like, okay, what's going to happen? And then he just trotted up the field and you just get to watch him fall over. It's there was no sweating it. So it was pretty awesome.
It's awesome.
Mike, how was your wind that morning? If I remember right, that was an east wind morning, right?
Yeah, and it was probably, gosh, I'm not somebody that loves east winds because I feel like where we are, it's always trying to switch back to the west. And we had problems the day before. It was all northeast, east northeast, but it was light and variable essentially. But that it was blowing at least that early in the day. The front was moving through. In fact, it started raining. It rained on us a little bit. It was forecasted to start at like 1 o'clock. But we got some cells that came over us at 11. We were trying to go out there and take pictures and shoot the recovery and all this. And, I think that front coming through really had it blowing steady. And I mean, it was a good solid wind. It was like 10 to 12 miles per hour. So it blew true. And, I was basically blowing it straight back up this a thick tree line. We kind of have this mowed area among all these big white oaks, and down along the creek is thick multi-floor rows, and then it gets to the edge of, it's kind of like it's a row of trees, though it's in the timber. It's kind of open on both sides of it. There's heavy trails, and I've noticed that in shed season. In fact, Grant, Max, and I were talking when we were in shed season. Just they run the creek, and then there's where that gate is. There's the creek kind of has a high bank. It's probably 12 feet up. And so it just directs their movement. It's kind of S curve, and they come up right there, and then they're just a real heavy trail. And I'd been talking to Rye about trying to hunt there, and you basically need a straight east to get in the tree we got in. And it just worked out. I kind of thought, we use thermals, and we're gonna pile in there and try it. And I mean,
Sometimes that's what you gotta do.
Messy, yeah, for this deer, for as much as he was daylight and as much as I sat that farm, and deer that weren't on camera, like Big Mac, I'm having 6 encounters with them, and I'm seeing Patient X, I'm seeing all these other deer. And I mean, I kind of got him zoned in towards the end there. I mean, I had 3 encounters in a week, but it was crazy to me that we're sitting on the ridge top, beautiful area of turnips, and the night before I had 8 does come out the food plot, not a single buck around. I'm like, what time of year is it? I mean, they didn't get the memo. What's going on, And it's just been weird. We've talked about that on the last couple of podcasts, but it worked out, that doe could not have been in heat. Obviously, he saw her, he harassed her, but then he was going, that tree line you walk up and cross over goes right into that bowl that he beds in seemingly every day. And for a time of year where you can't really pattern deer, I mean, he was like, he had what seemed like a predictable pattern. I mean, he was on the same couple cameras. He was always at the backside of that food plot on that camera. And I was like, well, I'm just going to get between those 2 cameras. And lo and behold, here he comes. That's the same thing. I mean, it's kind of nutty, but I'm hoping this next week we see some more vigorous rutting, more chasing and that kind of stuff. And hopefully we're not going to bleed over into lockdown and have, slow hunts and mixed in. But it sounds like some people are hopefully this weather really kicks it off and lights it up again. And I'm looking forward to this weekend. We're going to spend at least a couple days in the woods.
I'm glad for you that the saga's over. It was so funny talking to you almost every day and be like, oh, we hunt here, but he was on camera at 7:30 here, or he was 4:30 here. I was starting to have visions of, Winky's double G4 buck, where it's just like, I mean, that dang deer would get shot at and still come out the next day. Like, just, it's crazy the difference, deer that we, especially when we're targeting individual deer and learning and just how different some, the activity levels of some deer compared to others. And it's always fascinating to me. And this was a pretty interesting one that you were able to kind of monitor, from early in October, basically, to just see how he acted and his non-aggressive behavior on the farm and, stuff like that. It's always really cool to me.
Yeah, I agree. Totally fascinating. And I mean, I've only been really targeting specific deer for a few years now. And I mean, it's a mental struggle, right? I mean, so it gets frustrating, right? So it's as much that as anything to commit to it and to keep going and trying to get it done. And I mean, I think that was like day 29 or something of hunting. I mean, that's a lot of sits. It's like the frustration would make me want to sit more. I was like, I'm gonna get him, I'm just gonna keep going in there. And I mean, I know you and I talked a few times. I'm like, I gotta give it. I just gotta go somewhere else. I gotta look at a different tree because I'm just getting frustrated. But you know that it's just a matter of time. Like the deer's active, he's on his feet, he's in this couple hundred acres, and if I keep sitting in there, I mean, eventually it should happen. And then you see him interact with other deer and kind of get beat and realize that, there was multiple times where I'm doing rattling sequences, and later in the day, I get a trail camera pic that he was probably 200 yards away right around that time. It's like, I know he heard that. And there were just multiple instances where, you're like, he's just not going to be super aggressive like some of these other deer, and he's probably getting pushed over. And he really shifted. It was interesting as he had these encounters with other bucks. The trail cameras, I mean, he was on some on the west side of the farm, then kind of the middle of the farm, and then all of a sudden, cameras I never had him on the east side, and it was those three, and it was those three every day. And I was like, it was just interesting. He just like, well, I'll just go over here. There's enough does, and I'll just go over here. And it's so much fun, right? It creates so much excitement, and then to be successful is extra rewarding in that situation. But what a strange deer is what I kept telling Robbie. He's out in the parking lot. We're in this, like, what is he doing? But anyway, pretty cool. I couldn't be more excited, and it's been nice to sit back and relax a few days.
Makes it easier to go back to work, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, once you get one down, it's kind of like, all right, year's good. I'm happy. Takes the pressure off, kind of thing. I can start thinking more about the girls and my wife and how we're going to strategize getting everybody on deer later in the year. But anyway, I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of spend a little time down the River Bottom farm and maybe make a few sits for Dak or some of those other bucks we got going. And we've had all sorts of interesting switches around in my kids' school with COVID and everything. And now they're online. And so we're actually down at the cabin. We're hanging out down in the cabin for the next few weeks while the COVID at the school cools down. So we're going to, spend some time hunting some other farms, since I've only made probably 4 or 5 sits this year down here in this area. So excited to kind of keep learning. I mean, the home farm, last year I killed pretty early. I mean, I didn't really hunt it in the rut. This was the first year I really hunted it in the rut and sort of watched how deer used it and what areas were being cruised. And so that's always fascinating. And all these properties I can stand to learn quite a bit more. And so it'll be fun to do that and catch a little bit of rut this next week.
What ultimately pushed you to the area that you were in? Just seeing him, or just a hunch that he was going to come through that area because you had tried to connect the dots in the past and it hadn't worked out?
Yeah, it was a combination of things. I mean, I started out the year pretty conservative. Like, if I sit on the field edge, I just sit here enough times, he's going to walk by me. I don't have to go push him out. I don't have to go get in the cover. And that's kind of how it worked last year with turkey foot. I mean, I've got that cherry tree sets in the tree line in a narrow gap in the field, and it just a lot of deer walk there. And he has walked there. I just I missed out on those days. And then he was just more active in areas that I did not expect a mature deer to be active in daylight, sort of out by the house. The dogs are barking, the guy's mowing the lawn, and there he is walking the mowed path. You can't really see the house. There's just a lot of, the CRP is tall and all this, and he's right next to the cover. But it just was a little bit surprising to me. I don't really have other mature deer doing that. And, so when I really narrowed down where I thought he was, which kind of was going into the backside of that food plot in this really thick creek bottom area, I hunted a lot on one side, and then, had an encounter with him. The 6x5 was more in there, and he kind of seemed to disappear from there. So I moved to the other side, and I hunted it the last couple of days. And we were sitting where we can see a lot. We were on the ridgetop, and we can see a lot. And there was one area that I couldn't see, and I knew that heavy trail was through there. And I just thought, he must be cutting across right there. It kind of made sense on an aerial map. Sure. And like I said, I went back and forth about where I should go, because I thought I'd just go on the back side of that bowl, but get a little tighter, because there were just so many days where he went in the same spot. And I thought at some point in the morning, he'll probably come cruise through there. Not that he's going to bed, but just come cruise the downwind side of that doe bedding. But, part of me didn't really want to get in on there and really blow it out. And I thought, I don't have a tree picked out. It's going to be just a mess in the morning crashing in there. So this other area was less of that. I mean, I've got a a farm road that goes right through the timber from the front field to the back field, and it's mowed. And so I can walk up on that ridge, and then I just go down off that ridge into this tree line like 50 yards. I mean, it's a bunch of thick stuff, but it's less intrusive, and also I could see more country. I mean, if I went get in that bowl, I was locked into what I could see in that bowl. And so getting on this area, like I say, I could see like 180 degrees around me, basically, the way the timber edge turns. I can kind of see out both ways. And that played into at least being able to lay eyes on him, which I thought would be an advantage. I see exactly where he's coming in and make a move on him next time. But I happened to pick the right tree, you know, or close enough that I could, you know, talk him into come and walk over. So
Sure.
yeah, lots of cat and mouse. I think we counted. So 29 days, I didn't hunt every day for him, but it was 13 different sets on the farm, different hanging hunts or some permanent stands, but 13 different trees that I moved around and tried in this. I mean, it's a couple hundred acres. So we were bouncing all around, and you know, just kept narrowing it down and following obviously the information I was getting from the cell cams, and eventually the stars aligned.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mike. I mean, that's just it. You're picking something that's very difficult to do when you single out one deer. You're trying to share the same 20 yards when he could be in 200 acres or 500, and it's just
Right.
hard to do, man.
Yep.
So for those of us who have done that, and I haven't done a lot of it, this is really my second year committing myself, well, sort of committing myself, could change it any minute, to one deer. But how much stock do any of you guys put in that data that you're getting from the trail cameras versus data that you get from actually see? Do you put more faith in you laying eyes on him and putting yourself in maybe within 50 or 100 yards of him, or do you put as much stock in the trail camera photos that you're getting, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it varies from deer to deer and property to property. Like some properties that I know better, I know them well. I know how the deer tend to move through them. I know where the good pinches are. I mean,
Sure.
that's a little bit easier to put yourself in a good position. So obviously you can't beat encounters. I mean, I think live encounters make a big difference, but I mean, cell cam information, I mean, it not only does it keep me motivated. So that was, you know, if I was the first multiple weeks I hunted this deer, I never saw him. And if I didn't have pictures tell me he was there, I would have thought he wasn't there. Right. I mean, I was seeing every other mature buck on the farm. And so just keeping my head in the game and staying confident, or like, you know, just positive about being able to hunt them and having a chance of success, you know, that's a huge thing. But I mean, this deer shifted over a whole bunch. It would have been different if I was hunting like Big Mac. Let's say Big Mac was my target. I mean, he was just all over the place all the time. We saw him all the time. He was chasing does from early on. I mean, he was super active. So, you know, the deer's personality plays into that decision making for me, and how well I know the farm, and you know, also previous years of history with a deer. I mean, I think there's so much information that be gleaned like year to year with the deer. You know, this deer was 4 years old last year. I thought I knew which deer it was. His back changed a bunch. You know, I had one encounter with him last season, and I remember where he was active last year from monitoring trail cameras, but it's like I never studied it. But I knew, you know, I kind of talked about earlier in the year, if it is that same deer, this is the general area I'm going to be able to target him. But then seeing how he interacted with other mature deer and how he moved, because it was clear movement. It wasn't like it was just random. It was very clear based on trail camera information. And yeah, so it's a little bit of everything. I mean, it's hard to say one thing is more valuable than another, but boy, that you know, if obviously you went pull your home card every day, that's great. You get information, but being able to get it from the cell cam and not go messing around in there, having that regular, you know, most recent information, it helps you make those quick adjustments, because, you know, he was doing one thing for 2 or 3 days and then one thing for 2 or 3 days. And after I saw a pattern for like a couple of days, I said, well, maybe he'll do it tomorrow. And I think that played a role in being successful.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Mike, when you said the multiple years. You know, when you start adding all that together, you keep all the information, you know, your trail cameras and everything. You look back on previous years, pretty soon you start to really see a pattern where this deer is going to be. You know the area he's most likely to be. And then the rut sometimes can throw some of that out the window, because, you know, he'll take a stroll here or there. You don't expect him to be. And you know, so I think all the
Yeah.
information.
I kept saying, you know, if we get too much farther in, he's gone, and I'm gonna have to wait till post rut. And it was amazing. I mean, every day it looked like every day I got pictures of him, it looked like he wasn't with a doe. And I'm like, it's November 10th, you know, like what's I started to question his interest, but anyway, here we are. It worked out. So like he's following the boys around, man. God dang. Anyway, here we go.
Jared, do you have anything to add with respect to chasing one deer? You've got a little bit of experience with that.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Yeah.
No,
Right now,
like,
mine's just hate.
yeah, it's more hate than love most of the time, especially this year. To answer your question, Jason, you know, it's a combination of both the encounters and the info you get from trail cameras. I still would love to see a deer over just relying on trail cam. It's just so much more powerful. You can see exactly where they came from, where they went, what they were doing, that type of stuff that you can't always get from a single image. But the trail cameras are your eyes when you're not there, and so you kind of have to just use both of those things. Trail cameras obviously have changed the game. Cell cameras especially have changed the game. So it allows you, like Mike said, to make more real time, or maybe not real time, but you know, shorter turnaround adjustments, like day by day instead of maybe week by week, depending on how often you pull cards. So it's a game changer, no doubt. But you want to use a combination of both the encounters and the trail cam info to make a game plan on these individual deer. I like doing it just for the challenge. That's the primary reason I like picking out specific deer.
Right.
It's a lot of fun learning, like I alluded to earlier, the personalities. I think that's probably been my favorite part about picking out specific deer. Just it's crazy how different they are. We talk about all these different things and answer these questions with general, you know, answers about what we see and how mature bucks act. But when you really start pinpointing them, you can learn so many individual unique characteristics, and it's so cool. And I think a lot of them revolve around the aggressiveness of a deer. And you know, back to your question about trail cameras, I think you can learn a lot, or at least I have over the years learned a lot about a buck's aggressive behavior just based on trail cameras, like how aggressively they work scrapes even. I see a lot of, or some bucks that will come and just, it seems like it's always just a scent check. They come and just a little scent check and then they move on, scent check, move on. Where some bucks will come in, just stand there for 5 minutes and rip it apart. And I've kind of been able to tie those together as the latter is the more aggressive buck and maybe more callable and maybe more visible because they're always moving around and kind of establishing territory, where some of those little more timid ones can be a little tougher because they're not as callable and more like the Chubbs buck that Mike's been hunting. So all that stuff is fascinating to me. I love the challenge of hunting specific deer and learning specific deer as well.
Yeah, I think particularly when you use video mode on the cameras, and you see their action, you know, and then that was another probably advantage, I would say, to seeing the deer in person, right? I mean, you can get some personality information from trail cameras, but that's where the advantage of the encounters, right? I mean, I had 3 encounters up to this one, and that was telling me a lot about that buck's personality, is watching him interact with other deer. And so that's a huge advantage to the encounters, you know, not only just sort of where they go and how they're moving and how they're using the creek bottom or whatever, but you know, obviously watching us get his butt kicked a few times, I was like, I see.
Yeah, I can see where that's a huge advantage to learning their personality, is just being able to see how they're reacting. The deer that I've been after, I've seen in the dark more than I've seen in the light, and I've certainly seen on trail camera more than I've seen in any other situation. But you know, I think about half the trail camera pictures I have of him recently have a branch stuck in his horns. But then you know, I'll see him and I'll question, you know, whether or not He's even chasing a doe because he's always alone, always alone.
It's interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, certainly he's aggressive. I watched him on video, work a scrape and all that stuff. But yeah, who knows? The
Yeah.
story
Without
continues.
without Max here, I was gonna jump in and just try to roll through two questions that we got submitted. One we were talking about earlier with especially today and yesterday's conditions. I don't have the exact question, but it was about hunting in high winds, how we alter our setups, like where we like to hunt, and how it affects deer movement in our experience. So if anyone wants to jump on that, we can roll through that question. And I got one more afterwards that also got submitted.
Owen, you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. And you gotta kind of break this down into different times of the year too, because I think I talked about this on an earlier podcast. When you get into the rut and, maybe the cruising part or chasing, I don't think there's anything that stops them from moving for the most part. Like I was talking about one hunt in particular, I went and hunted it. It was winds like what we had yesterday. And I thought, nothing's going to move in this. There's no way. And I'm talking myself out of hunting, of course. So I go do a hanging hunt about 5 feet off the ground because that's all the farther I feel safe being up. And I had the hunt of my life. There's bucks cruising everywhere, and I didn't think there's any way they would move. And I said the same thing today. And sure enough, I'm getting mature bucks in the middle of the day on camera. It's nothing stops them from moving under those conditions. I mean, when they're keyed up for the rut and it's this time of year, I don't know if there is anything. But now, if you go to different times of the year early in the year, I think some high winds like this may shut them down, just like a driving rain would. They're just not going to move well. And late season, again, if it's bitter cold and windy, they probably still move pretty decent. So I think it depends on the time of year for me.
Have you been out the last couple days, or you been
I
taking it
have
easy?
not. Now, I hunted yesterday morning, but I didn't hunt, the evening before. I didn't hunt it all today either.
Do you try to strategize and get in lower areas and in high wind areas?
Yeah,
Kind of out of the wind, sheltered spots, I guess.
absolutely. Yeah, if you've got a hill that's breaking that wind, there's such a difference. If you just go stand in a spot like that, that's just down the
More
hill.
comfortable. Yeah.
Oh man, it's just way different. Yeah. But that's the places where you almost need to be in a blind because a lot of times that's a backdraft, a
Swirl.
swirling wind.
Right.
It's just challenging to
Yeah.
hunt it, and if you can pick and choose, it may not be your best day, but if it's Saturday and that's your day off, it's like try to find an area that's out of the wind and shelter as much as you can and get in there and sit. Particularly this time of year, I definitely wouldn't tell anybody not to go. Like you said, I mean, you got a hot doe that runs through, it don't matter what's going on. So
Yep.
Have you guys
Yeah.
noticed that, particularly in high wind situations, that deer will they'll prefer a cut cornfield, whether it's recent or not, a cut cornfield over a standing corn. They'll just literally avoid standing corn in those higher wind days. Has anyone noticed that? I have, particularly this year and last year, and maybe a little bit the year before it started to get my attention. And I just wonder if it's because of all the noise that's taken place, with those corn leaves versus them being out in the open, being able to see, have the advantage of see, smell, and, hear to an extent.
I haven't noticed that, but I have noticed that I see more concentration of movement in areas where deer can see, because we've all been in situations where when we get real high winds, they're on edge. They're kind of skittish, they're everything's moving around. So they're probably just paranoid, just trying to keep up with everything. So I have noticed they're just a little more relaxed in areas they can see a little further. There's not some blowing around in their face. And so that could be somewhat related to what you're seeing in the standing versus cut corn situation.
yeah, it makes sense in that regard.
And I'd particularly noticed that last night, because I saw just about zip last night in the standing corn, Jared, that I told you I was going to. And on my way out and on my way home, I got out of there relatively early because I was afraid that what was going to happen is that field was just going to fill up at dark. So I just decided to, cut my ties early and get out of there. And then on the way home, I think there was 18 deer in one of our open cornfields. So, and a couple of them were some decent bucks. I couldn't tell what they were, but you could tell they were good bucks. What's the other question you had?
All right, this one comes from Andy. He said, what are your guys' thoughts on using a doe bleat? Do you guys have confidence in this type of call? What situations would you use one or not use one? Where does a doe bleat fit into the entire calling repertoire of grunting, rattling, snort wheezing, etc.? We'll love your guys' thoughts on this strategy.
Mike, didn't you use a
Mike?
doe bleat with
Yeah.
Chubbs?
It's one of the first times I've ever really used it. I can't. I mean, I'll throw. When I'm calling in general, and it's interesting because we talked about calling on the main show not that long ago. We didn't talk very much about doe bleeding, but when I'm calling, I'm generally trying to paint a picture of what it might sound like for multiple deer interacting. And so if I'm doing some tending gruts, I might throw out a doe bleat, and then you envision bucks squaring off, snort wheezing, breaking into a fight. So if I'm like doing blind calling, I might do that just to paint the most realistic picture. But I doe bleated at him after I watched him get his butt kicked in that fight. I was like, well, I'm not going to go aggressive at him when I see him. And so the one time that I saw him cross the plot, I think third encounter in the back, the first thing I did was throw a doe bleat out, but I didn't have a doe bleat mouth call. I just had one of them cans, and it wasn't loud enough, right? So I take it out of my pocket. I got the big can, the one that was so loud, and I flip it over. It's like, meh, like he doesn't even. So I grunted a couple of times to stop him, and then I did the doe bleat, thinking if he hears a doe, maybe he'd come over based on the time of year. And I really had the same experience the morning I shot him. I mean, I throw the doe bleat, and he didn't do much. So then I threw some grunts at him, and I mean it was all very soft. He's in close range. I knew he couldn't see because it was so thick. So I'm trying to just paint that picture like, hey, this doe's over here. There's another little buck harassing her, and I'm not sure what enticed him to turn and give me a shot, but it was probably maybe a combination of all of it. I do know stories of people, doe bleeding a deer in, like maybe a deer that's heavily called at or something, just taking that out. They don't hear that a lot, and maybe throwing something like that. But I don't use it a ton. I mean, I certainly have never used it as a standalone, but I'll mix it in.
Yeah,
I don't.
echo that, Mike. Go ahead, Jared.
Oh, I was gonna say I kind of similar. I don't use it very often. I think the reason I don't use it very often is I don't hear it very often in the wild. I hear grunting all the time, snort wheeze pretty often, sparring and fighting pretty often. I don't hear doe bleats very often in the wild, and to me, I just don't use it very often for that reason. But I'm like you, Mike. I've heard stories of guys like, oh, I gave him the can call and came right in. I hear it all the time. Like guys are successful using that call. I personally just don't have a lot of experience doing it, and the only reason I can think of is I just don't hear it in the wild very often.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agreed with what Mike said. And in particular, if you've got a buck that, like you said, is just not aggressive, that may be a good time to use it. You don't want to throw anything aggressive at him. I thought that very thing the other day. I seen light switch way away from where I expected to see him, and I snort wheezed at him, and he came up and took a look, and then he just went slinking the other way like he wasn't supposed to be there. I said a bleat in that case might have been the ticket, that might have worked. And I have had them come running into that call. I mean, just like they'd come running into a grunt or whatever, so I have had some success with that. So I think it is a good call. And I've probably heard that doe bleat, outside of the rut, you hear grunt all the time, but I've heard a lot of bleating, especially you hear the interaction between the fawns and the moms. You hear a lot of it then,
Yep.
Yeah, early season.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with Owen. I feel like bleeding is definitely a little bit of a safer bet if that deer is not aggressive. The only time I've ever really bleeded at all was if I've actually seen a deer and I know he's working in the opposite direction or anything. I'll try to use a bleat to bring him back in, but I've never bleeded blindly or anything like that. So
No bleeding for me at all.
Hey, have any of you guys ever tried a fawn ball? When you're doe hunting, have you ever tried a fawn ball? That can be just a crazy good call. Does will come running. It's a lot of fun.
I've heard
I've
that.
seen
I've
that
never
happen.
done it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've called coyotes with that before and had experience with the does just charging in.
Yeah.
I actually had a question. I've just got to look it up here. It's something silly. Between Jared, Mike, and Owen, who's the best shot?
I have to go with
Hey.
Jared.
We're gonna have to have it. We're gonna have to have a shoot off to find out.
Yeah, we're gonna have to shoot this off.
All right, TBD.
Oh man. I like it. Stir the pot over there.
And then someone
That
else
wasn't-
wanted.
Yeah, that wasn't even a viewer snake. That was just Jason's question.
Yeah.
No, I can tell you exactly who
It's
it
gonna take
was.
me a while to find this one.
It was from Matt Ratliff. And Bill Van Orem wants to know who can watch his kids tomorrow so he can go hunting.
Those are made up names. Yeah.
Bill
I got
actually
5.
hunts.
My wife's pretty good, so if he's not too far, I can bring him over.
Okay. He's just down the road from me a bit
What's
here.
2 more, you know?
Right. We don't need him. I don't need the competition in the timber tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, I got you.
Anybody have anything else before we go?
Is everybody gonna be out this weekend?
I'll be out.
Yeah, for sure.
Looking pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Cold, high pressure northwest. I mean, it's pretty exciting. I think being in the right spot or whatever hot doe run around. I'm excited to hear how everybody does. We could have some pretty exciting hunts here.
Yeah.
All right.
The only thing I was gonna add real quick, Jason, is those of you guys are listening, you'll be able to watch the Chubbs hunt on the Middle Whitetail main show on the 22nd. So not this Monday, but the following Monday. So you'll be able to watch the whole Chubbs story and how the hunt went down.
Grant's using all of his skills. It's gonna be awesome.
yeah.
I can't wait to see it.
I'm excited to put that one together. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a good story.
All right. Well, I think
Good luck, everybody.
that's all we got. Yeah. Good luck to everybody this weekend. Be safe.